So now that we know about looping, let's use loops to read a whole table of data from a file. And we're going to be using a file format called CSV, which stands for comma-separated values. And there's support for CSV files right in PHP, which makes working with that format really easy. And so I'm going to start with the same data set that I used last week. So I'm going to go and search for DASL. And then I'm going to click on the Data and Store Library and list all topics. And I'm going to go to Education. And I'm going to find the same data set, what makes a good teacher story. And data file name. And here's the data. So I want to turn this table of data into a CSV file. So I'm going to select all the data here, except for the header line. And then I'm going to create a new folder inside of my project directory, and I'm going to call this data. So now I have a data folder, and I'm going to right click here and create a new file, and I'm going to call this tips.csv. So this is a common extension. It's a text format, but it's often given a CSV extension. You can actually import and export these from Excel really easily as well. So if you like working with spreadsheets, you can enter your data into an Excel spreadsheet and then save it as a CSV file and then use it inside of your PHP app. But I'm not going to bother with that right now. I'm just going to create an empty text file, and I'm going to paste my data into it. And then all I need to do to turn this into a CSV file is basically replace these tab characters here with commas. But what if there's a comma inside of these tip texts? Well, I need to make those be handled specially. And so what I want to do is, in addition to using a comma to separate these values, hence comma separated values, I also want to use double quotes to delimit this field. So it's going to be double quote delimited with comma separated values. And I'm going to do the same regular expression that I did last week, basically, except instead of turning it into an array of arrays, I'm just going to turn it into comma-separated values. So Control R for replace. I have regex checked, and I'm going to search for dot star and save that value, and then \T for tab, dot star, \T, dot star, \T, and then the last one, dot star. So those are the 4 pieces of information. And then I'm going to replace that with double quote, $1, double quote, comma, and then I know the rest of these are just numbers, so I don't need to double quote them. $2, comma, $3, comma, $4. And I'm going to hit replace all, and there's my CSV file just like I want it. Make sure that there's a new line at the end, and now I can actually read this in my program. So what I want to do is I want to add a new file to my project, and I'll call this tips.php. And I want to start with what I had last week. So the only difference between this version and last week's version is that I'm going to be reading the data from a file instead of creating an array in the program. So I'm going to open a Windows Explorer, and I'm going to go to C, XAMPP, htdocs, CIS 195P, week 3, and then I'm going to open this tips.php in a text editor. And I have it set to open it in Notepad by default. So here's my tips from last week. And I'm going to copy everything up to that array. Basically, I'm going to copy everything and then I'll cut the array out. So copy everything here, and then paste it into my new one, select all, paste. And I'm going to cut this tips array out here, like so. So now tips is just an empty array, and then I'm going to read the contents from tips.csv. So the first thing I have to do is I have to open this file, and then I have to read the contents one record at a time, and then I close the file when I'm done with it. So let's go ahead and say file is equal to fopen for file open, and then I give the name of the file, which is data/tips.csv. And then I give a mode, and I want to read this file as text. I'll use single quotes here. So this is going to open the file for reading as a text file. And then file will either hold a file resource or it will hold the value false. So I'm going to put an if statement in here that says if not $file, then I'm going to error out. So I'm going to echo file data/tips.csv wasn't found. And we'll close off our h1 tag. And I have a little problem because I'm using a double quote inside, or single quote inside a single quoted string. So I can escape that with a backslash. And that's how you put a single quote inside of a single quoted string. And then we'll exit. So now if the file open fails, I'm going to kick out of the program with an error message. Otherwise, if I get here, I know the file opened correctly. So to read the contents, I'm going to use a do loop. So I said before that do loops don't come up very often, but here's a case where you want to use a do loop. And the reason is because you don't know that you've hit the end of the file until after you've read the first line. If you read the first line and it comes back and the first line is empty, you know you're done. Otherwise, you can continue reading the file until you hit an empty. So it doesn't make any sense at all to check whether this file is done or not until after you've read the first line. So let's go ahead and read the file. And the way I'm going to get a line from the file is by using fgetcsv, which is built into PHP. And you give it a file, which is actually a resource. And there's some optional parameters as well having to do with the delimiter and the separator. So you can use files that aren't quite CSVs because they have different delimiters or separators. And then fgetcsv will either return an array that represents the line of the file, or it will return false if you're at the end. So if it returns an array, basically each of those comma-separated values is going to be returned as a string in an indexed array. So the first cell of the first line is going to be the string provide help willingly. And then the second element in the line, which is $line sub 1, is going to be the string 705. And then $line sub 2 is going to be the string 22. And then $line sub 3 is the string 8. So it's going to return all the values as strings in a single array, starting with a 0 offset, 0, 1, 2, 3. Or, if you're at the end of the line and you try to read past the end of the file, if you're at the end of the file and you try to read past the end of the file, it will just return false. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check to see if not $line, that means I didn't get a line coming back, so I'm done. So I'm going to break out of the do loop. So if I get here, I do have a line, and I'm going to add it to my tips array. So when it's gone through the entire file, I'm going to end up with an array of arrays, just like I had before. And I'm going to continue looping while So as long as I'm getting a line that isn't false, it's going to keep looping, and then it's going to break out when it hits the first false line. And then everything else here should be the same. So I should be able to just run this. Let's go to the browser and go to week 4 tips.php, and it worked. So teacher tip, offer words of encouragement, 94% agree. Give homework to enhance learning, 79%, and so on. So it works exactly the same as before, but I'm fetching the contents from a file. Now, if I had accessed a file that didn't exist, like let's say I tried to access tip.csv, this is what I would see. Oh, so I'm actually getting an error here. So if I want to suppress that error message, I can use the error suppression operator. And then I'm just going to get my header coming back. There. So that's what happens when you have an incorrect file name. That's what happens when it works.